Hello, welcome everyone to the 30th anniversary conference of the EEAC network in Helsinki, Finland. And the topic for the next 2 days is the critical decade of action, mobilizing sustainability transformation in Europe. So EEAC, the European Environment and Sustainable Development Advisory Council's network, has been connecting councils and expert panels across Europe for 30 years. The EEAC network consists of 18 advisory bodies from 14 European countries and regions. And these members offer advice to their respective national or regional governments related to climate change and the environment and sustainable development. And this year's anniversary celebration offers us an opportunity to reflect on the past years, but more importantly, to evaluate critically how we can leap to a sustainable future from now on. Now, the conference is hosted by Finland's 3 independent science panels, which are the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, the Finnish Climate Change Panel, and the Finnish Nature Panel. And we'll be here for 2 days. The conference brings together experts from academia, civil society, the private sector, and government to discuss the next steps for facilitating the sustainability transformation in this critical decade of action. And we'll hear interesting keynote speeches, we'll engage in workshops and parallel sessions, and these will include the following themes. We'll talk about joining forces for sustainability transformation. We'll talk about Europe's global responsibility in combating climate change. And we will also talk about the mid-term policy actions that are necessary to take against the biodiversity crisis. So feel free to share your insights from the conference on Twitter and other social media. Hashtags for social media, you can see them here, I hope you can see them here, are EEAC30 and critical decade. And you can also hashtag the handle EEAC network. Tag the handle. So my name is Hanna Nikkanen. I'm an environmental journalist at the Finnish long-form magazine Longplay, and I will be facilitating all the keynote sessions at this conference. And also one note about today is that today, actually in about an hour, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, will be giving her annual State of the Union address to the European Parliament. And so that will happen about 10 our time, and that will, of course, be like an interesting addition to our conversations here to hear what she says in Brussels while we're gathered here in Helsinki. But now, I have the honor of introducing our first speaker. She's Saara Karimi. She's a Finnish climate activist and a journalist who's currently working for the Finnish Broadcasting Company. So welcome, Saara. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. I have to first apologize. My iPad's charge just died, so I have to read it through my phone. My name is Saara Karimi. I'm a climate and a human rights activist and also a journalist in the Finnish broadcasting company Yle. But today I'm here to offer the take of an activist on what should be done about the greatest threats humanity faces. As we all know, the climate crisis is accelerating and we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. My roots are from Afghanistan, and I've seen firsthand how the climate crisis already impacts those who are the most vulnerable and the least responsible for it. Action must be taken now. This is no longer an issue that can be pushed back. At the same time, we cannot solve only one issue without facing the others. Inequality is rampant, and especially women's rights are under attack. In a crisis, the ones who suffer first are women. Millions of women in crisis settings live in danger. They face daily risks to their health and safety and limited access to medical care and social services. We have seen how child marriages are on the rise again. Drought, failing harvests, and water scarcity are a part of everyday life for people in my second home country. Meanwhile, here we are in the global north, comfortable in our everyday lives, still avoiding responsibility and forgetting the lives of millions in the global south. The climate crisis cannot be addressed without addressing the injustice of the situation. The rich are fine, they will always be fined, and they would be more than happy to let the poorer countries and people bear the brunt of the crisis. The global north has a moral obligation to help the global south and not leave them to suffer the impacts of the actions of the north. In addition to the climate crisis, there is the issue of the biodiversity loss. It is once again easy to blame others for logging their rainforest, but ignore what's happening in our own backyard. We are chopping down our old forest more than ever before. No one else can protect and save our nature but us. But yet, we are currently heading in the opposite direction. The loss of Finland's forest carbon sinks should be the news that wakes our leaders up. When the last of our national treasures we claim to so value and nurture is chopped down, maybe then we'll realize what we've just lost. But it is not too late. We can still change the course. This is the decade where we no longer can close our eyes and delay the decisions that must urgently be made. While I believe individual actions are important and everyone can do their part, I also believe that we are stronger together. We can all do our part at home by small acts like recycling, but that is not going to save us anymore. We need to come together and demand our leaders to take actions immediately. This is a fight that we cannot lose, and we need everyone to take a part. At the end of the day, the question is whether you choose to protect your own interests or those in need of our protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your insights and for connecting us with the biggest questions of this decade, and also for raising the issue of global responsibility, which will set the tone, I hope, for the discussions that we're having here. And next, please let me invite our next speaker to the stage. She's Dr. Katriina Siivonen, co-chair at the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, and she hails from the field of future studies. So welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for Sahra for your important and heavy words. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as the co-chair of the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, I would like to wish all of you warmly welcome to this 13th EEAC annual conference organized by, as we heard already, Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, the Finnish Climate Change Panel, and the Finnish Nature Panel, together then with this EEAC network. The theme of the conference is Critical Decade of Action. We have heard already this critical decade now several times, but it is important to emphasize it. Mobilising Sustainability Transformation in Europe is the subtitle, and we will have 2 intensive days to discuss this theme from several perspectives. To begin the discussion of our conference, it's good to notice that we can foresee a future in which good, healthy and meaningful life with a minimal burden on the environment is possible. This will be achieved through interdisciplinary economic wisdom, the implementation of bold systemic transformation, and a broad dialogue in society. It is important to involve those groups and organizations which up until now have not had the chance to participate in the building of a sustainability way of life. Thus, we emphasize in the conference theme and in the different presentations and discussions in the conference the need to mobilize and involve new actors in sustainability work in the society. A future is sustainable in the long term a future that is sustainable in the long term is created today on the basis of scientific knowledge through joint efforts by various actors. It is not an impossible task, but making it happen will require political commitment across the board, a respect for knowledge-based decision-making, and the rethinking of our way of life in a manner that involves all people. We must break free from pursuing such progress that increases ecological debt. Being able to do this requires that each decision maker in different sectors and on different levels of society actively takes responsibility for identifying risks and opportunities and participates in the eco-social building and development of new technologies that recognize the limits of this planet. European countries inevitably operate in the global community, as Zahra also mentioned, as a part of the planet's natural systems. The impacts of production and consumption extend to ecosystems and people in different parts of the Earth. European countries have the prerequisites for showing the way to others, and also a global obligation to do so. Leading by example requires that we, together with various actors in society, recognize the view of a sustainable future, set ambitious goals, and take determined actions to achieve them. The overuse of natural resources and environmental pollution have progressed so far that instead of a gradual change, we need a swift societal transformation which allocates resources in a new way, one that fosters sustainability. The sustainability transformation in a systemic approach for society to change in an orderly and holistic manner. There is a need to turn societal well-being maintaining systems from the current unsustainable activities to ones that are sustainable in all respects. National governments can dismantle obstacles and modify structures, but they alone cannot build a sustainable future or accelerate the sustainability transformation. The participation of all actors of society in various roles is needed in business, in financing system, the media sector, municipalities, education and research, communities and associations, and also as individuals. And also individuals are active on all these levels. We can notice that there is a broad mutual understanding concerning the need to foster sustainable development. However, the concrete methods to do so are still debated. The Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development has identified the key illusions that slow down the progress of the sustainability transformation, as well as ways to overcome these illusions. They are published in the so-called second yellow publication of the panel. To read more deeply about them, you can find the free publication from this conference desk. So, dear colleagues, we aim to proceed towards a successful sustainability transformation. We can imagine a state of activity that we want to pursue and co-create it with all different actors in the society. It is a future state which does not yet exist, but the elements of which can already be identified. It takes a different form in different countries, but the principle is the same. In the state of activity, the institutions maintained by people will jointly develop and maintain systems that support the health and well-being of both people and the planet, generating a harmonious planetary entity. The beginning rich can already be felt. They can be felt on different levels of society and in different groups of actors. These themes and discussions are discussed in coming 2 days. We hope that the conference generates transdisciplinary, stimulating and critical discussion that promote networking between people from different backgrounds and interested in questions about sustainability transformation. So once again, on behalf of all organizers, and I wish you a warm welcome to the 13th EEAC Annual Conference.
Thank you, Katriina Siivonen. Again, lots of important points about interdisciplinary dialogue and the need for mobilization that covers different aspects, different sectors of society and knowledge-based decision-making. Again, themes that will that we will return to over and over on during these 2 days. And now our last speaker of this opening session is Arnau Gerald-Bassa, who is the chair of the EEAC network. Mr. Gerald-Bassa, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. We have had already truly inspiring contributions from this morning from Sarah and Katriina, so thank you very much on behalf of the EEAC. It is a great honor for me to address these words to you in my capacity of chairman of the EEAC network, the European Network of Advisory Councils on the Environment and Sustainable Development, in short, the EEAC network, you know, very long names. After 2 years in which the network organized all these activities, including 2 annual conferences virtually due to the pandemic, it is truly joyful to be able to meet again in person for the first time in 3 years. So we are extremely joyful for this. I'm, however, glad that this conference will also provide a hybrid format. This will allow us to hear the views of some distinguished experts who could not travel to Helsinki, and it also will allow many people to be following us from their respective countries. We send you, I don't know where is the camera, but we send you all greetings from Helsinki. This is the 30th annual conference of our network. It marks 30 years of a change, knowledge building, and joint work among advisory councils from all around Europe. We owe a great deal of gratitude to our host for enabling us to come here together, the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, thank you, the Finnish Climate Change Panel, and the Finnish Nature Panel. I would like, before continuing, to thank the panels for organizing and hosting this conference. And let me assure you, and I express this gratitude on behalf of the EEAC network as a whole. Dear colleagues, the conference is conducted during a critical moment for the future of the planet and humanity. A moment, moreover, critical for peace, with a war in Ukraine that has dramatically and forever changed the lives of millions of people and families. We would like to send our solidarity to all of them. I hardly need to explain this audience how dire the situation of our planet is. In its recent analysis, the Earth Commission makes, in its analysis that was issued last week, the Earth Commission makes a clear warning to the international community. 16 climate tipping points could be triggered if global temperature rises beyond 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Actually, 5 of these 16 tipping points may be already triggered at today's temperature. The destabilization in parts of Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, the widespread abrupt permafrost thaw, the collapse of convection in the Labrador Sea, and massive die-off of tropical coral reefs. The world is heading towards between 2 or 3 of global warming degrees of global warming, far away from the Paris Agreement goal. And as Johan Rockström, the co-chair of the Earth Commission and director of Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, said when this commission launched its paper, this situation sets Earth on course to cross multiple dangerous tipping points that will be disastrous for people across the world. To maintain livable conditions on Earth, protect people from rising extremes, and enable stable societies, here Johan Rockström arc, we must do everything possible to prevent crossing tipping points. Every 10th of a degree counts. It will come as no surprise that I fully agree with him. Can you hear me? Because I think the micro, okay. The world and Europe must radically accelerate decarbonization, decarbonizing the economy and rethinking resource use to limit the risk of crossing climate, but also biodiversity tipping points. This requires systemic change, starting immediately. The question is, will we be able to do it? And the question is clear. Ladies and gentlemen, as the title says, and it's not new, we face a critical decade of action. We are all aware of the difficulties we face in driving transformative action, either as governments and parliaments or as advisory bodies to these institutions. We are making progress in terms of policy making, but are we making progress at the right pace? And is implementation truly successful? The evidence so far shows that it is not the case. Despite the challenging situation, I really think that our councils and all colleagues attending this conference are part of the solution. This is why the title of the conference calls for mobilizing sustainability transformation in Europe. Let's push for it. Let's push for it, for this together. I would like to conclude my speech by expressing again the gratitude of the EEAC network to the 3 independent science panels based in Finland that have organized this conference. So, kiitos paljon. Dear colleagues, this means thank you in Finnish. Dear colleagues, I wish you all an inspiring conference. I look forward to hearing the insights, solutions, and views relevant to our common job. Thank you. Kiitos paljon.
And with those words, we conclude the opening session. Thank you, Mr. Kiratbassa. And again, welcome everyone who is either here in this room or watching us online. The program will now continue here in this room straight away with our first keynote sessions. And would our panelists please join me on stage? So, joining forces for global sustainability transformations, that is becoming even more critical. And we know that the next 10 years will both include probably lots of surprises and crises, and it will also set the path for many decades to come. So it's time, we know it's time for effective collective action, and we also know that it's not always simple. There are many unanswered questions about how to take those steps, how do we foster urgent collaborative processes in a way that amplifies democracy and peace and justice and inclusion, and who should take the lead. So in this session that is organized by the Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, which is an independent body consisting of 10 expert members from a broad range of scientific backgrounds and different universities and research institutions, we will be talking about these questions. How do we join forces? And again, hashtags are the same as I mentioned earlier, EEAC 30, critical decade, and if you want to tag the the handle of the Finnish Sustainable Development Expert Panel. That's Kestävyyspanel. It's kind of half Finnish, half English, just so you know. But before starting the actual panel, I thought we could let our panelists introduce themselves and say a few words about their relationship to the topic. What are you doing? What is your engagement with this topic? And maybe we can start right here at my left with Ms. Johanna Kentola-Lehtonen.
Okay, good morning everyone, and nice to be here. I'm working at the Prime Minister's office in the EU department. My job is to coordinate the Finnish EU positions for the European Green Deal, and mostly the climate and biodiversity issues, and also forest and agriculture are my responsibilities. So that's the coming from for me. But I also have a doctorate degree in international relations, which was dealing the business actors' influence on climate politics. And so I have been looking at from the point of view of various actors of this problem, and I can see that there is already a lot happening. So while we speak that a lot must to come through, we are already doing a lot, and I would start with the European Green Deal, which I think is a great example of systemic change that we are trying to do in our society at the moment, and that the European Commission has really tried to bring all the sectors, all the economic sectors into these issues of climate and environmental problems, and I believe that a lot is happening, but of course at the moment we also need a lot more. And one thing that I can see influences this development is that the politicians are mostly living in the moment. They are living today's world and today's crisis, and it's difficult for them because it's very hectic for the ministers, and in the situations like we're living at the moment, where there's crisis after crisis after crisis, so it's difficult to look beyond this moment here, and I think it's crucial that we have scientists and other actors who remind and bring it out through the media, for example, for the politicians, that the solutions we find to the crisis of today must also deal with the crisis of tomorrow that are coming next if we're not paying attention. But maybe this for the beginning.
Thank you. And next up we have Dr. Åsa Persson. Welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and good morning everyone. It's really great to be here, and let me first also say I think Finland is a real example to the world in terms of sustainable development governance, how you work with the SDGs, and having these three panels really set the example. So my name is Åsa Persson. I'm, like I think many of you here, have a research background, still an active researcher. I'm a research director and deputy director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, where we do applied research on sustainable development issues, really try to be useful to policymakers and increasingly also other actors. Business is definitely on the train since a few years, and also civil society. But I am also here as a member of the independent group of scientists to draft the next Global Sustainable Development Report, which is due next year. As you know, it's an SDG summit coming up in a year's time in the UN to take stock of Agenda 2030 and the 17 SDGs. So this group, we are building on the previous report, which actually we had Professor Eva Furman, who's maybe here or not, contributed to, so I wanted to share a bit what we are kind of seeing and learning from that report work.
And then, thank you. And then we have Mr. Olli Kärkkäinen. Please go ahead.
Thanks, and good morning from the Ministry of Finance. So I work in the Ministry of Finance with supporting evidence-informed and data-driven policymaking. So a lot of my job is to estimate the effects of different policy options, for example, on employment and inequality. My background is in economics, and I work as a researcher in the university and both in the public and private sector. So I've been kind of jumping between research and economic policy in my jobs. Coming from the view of the Ministry of Finance and our view of kind of estimating the effects of different policy options, I can see that the view of the Ministry of Finance is broadening as well. So we are not just thinking about employment or economic growth, but also the nature and climate change as a whole. So I think, in my view, we can see the broadening of the point of view also, and I think it's important to have the kind of the whole government looking in the same direction. Thanks.
Thank you. And then next up we have Ms. Miriam Boveda. Welcome and tell us about yourself.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here in Helsinki today. I'm working in the European Commission Directorate General in charge of regional and urban policy. So we are a small group, a team of 7 colleagues working on different issues related to sustainable growth, energy, environment, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and disaster risk management. And we also work on the newly created Just Transition Fund. We are working with the other directorate generals from the Commission, so environment, energy, climate, and other directorate generals to make our investment really transformational at European level. You know that we are the first investment in these areas at TO level, and we are now preparing for the next programming period, 2021-2027. So we are establishing policy lines for our investments. So what do we have to invest as a priority? And of course, we are a key element of the European Green Deal because we make our investment suitable for each region, because we work in partnership with the regions and with the member states. So this is how cohesion policy is implemented. In terms of projects that we have, we want to launch because we see that some stakeholders want to go further in sustainability transitions, but they need support. So we want to mobilize support in terms of technical assistance to help them in their goals of going beyond in certain projects or program in sustainability transitions. We have published a toolkit for supporting them in their programs, in their investments. So this is what we are aiming at in our team. In terms of background, I have worked also for a city council, so I saw in my daily work what are the key issues that you are facing to implement sustainability in a specific city council. Namely, I worked for the city of Toulouse in southern France. And I have worked in my PhD thesis on solidarity. So also what are the different tensions that you have in the society to achieve solidarity in legal terms, because I'm a lawyer in European law. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally we have Professor Lassi Linnanen, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm representing here a Finnish Expert Panel for Sustainable Development, and I'm Professor of Environmental Economics and Management at Lappeenranta-Lahti University of Technology. My background is in management sciences. Currently, our research is linking systems perspective on the sustainability transformation. And when taking this systems perspective, it's pretty obvious that all these, how we call them crises, like pandemics and war and ecosystem collapse, actually they are all interconnected. So there is actually not crisis after crisis, and we are waiting for the next crisis to come. We have a crisis or a system which is inducing this type of shocks, and then how to deal with this kind of situation. Typically, when taking the systems perspective, you have to look for root causes and try to understand why actually this kind of process goes on, and we will see whether we will able to recognize the root causes here.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Thank you for the introductions. And now we'll start with a very, very broad question. Sustainability transformation clearly requires a systems level approach, and all societal actors should work together in an integrated manner towards a common goal. And kind of starting from the governance point of view, Ms. Kentala-Lehtonen, what do you see as the most important mechanisms or measures for reaching this goal of like integrated collaboration across different sectors in society?
Like you said, it's a very broad question, very, very hard. I would start from the definition, and from our value base. I think we should start from defining a good life again. What is good life? And I think this is something that has been changing. The understanding in society of the climate crisis has really grown during the last 20 years, maybe. And at the moment, I think that the understanding of the biodiversity crisis is also growing very fast. So I think that these will be seen in the coming elections and in the coming years. And what I think, and saying that we need to define a good life, I mean, of course, that we have to have measurements for right issues, like a GDP may not be the best measure we should use for our economic. And I would take a few examples. What has happened during the COVID pandemic is the change of routines that we have been able to do when we have to. And I think that this is something we should be able to learn from also regarding the crises of the environment. Like once we had to go remote work, we were able to do that. And maybe this is something we can learn from. It was a good thing for the environment. The CO2 emissions went down because the traffic went down. And I think that this coming winter, we will need to learn a lot of new routines with the energy use all over Europe. So I think that we should use these experiences to also better adapt to the new situations of the environmental thing. But then what the government can do and is doing is of course it can soften the change, but it's not only through the financial support, but very much through the structural changes, the new standards, the new legislation is of course needed. But like I said already earlier, I think other actors are really much needed for the support of the politicians to go to the right direction and to have the right information. And at the same time, I think it's crucial that we remember the social aspect of the change, that we cannot come on only from the environmental side, because if we don't keep the people on board, And if we don't have the acceptability for the political decisions, it's impossible to make the change. So this is very important aspect to remember.
But to follow up, kind of when you mentioned, for example, the impact of the lockdowns, the CO2 emissions going down, that was a very short-term change that happened, and it's kind of clear that a sort of a forced situation where people have to, in face of a crisis, change their day-to-day lives, is that they're like, in order to make that kind of a change last longer, become a permanent part of people's lives, this will can be. There will, as you said, it will need to be softened. That process will need to be somehow gentler than what we experienced, for example, with the lockdowns. Do you have any practical tools for how to do that when it comes to transportation or energy use?
Yeah, I think that, about the remote work, I would say that we are not going back to the 2019, that it has come to stay, that part of the week the people will stay at home and work remotely. I think that is lasting from the COVID. Of course, we're not going to stay home forever, but stay more. And also with the energy use, I hope that as we learn the new routines, they will stick with us, because we will also save money. But with the concrete measures, I think the legislation, coming legislation and standards will force us towards this situation. I think in a way the current energy crisis is a kind of a human test for the prediction that when you rise the prices, the consumption goes lower. That is the prediction of the emission trading system and all the climate legislation. So now we'll see if it really happens.
Now I wanted to ask you, Ms. Boveda, for how does the EU's just transition mechanism address these questions of bringing everyone on board, negotiating changes that do come very close to people's everyday lives?
First, let me maybe set the scene. So the Just Transition mechanism is embedded in the cohesion policy, the Just Transition Fund. And we have accompanied structural change for several decades so far. So either by protecting the environment, investing in renewables, energy efficiency. And this is channeled through programming, and we are assessing investment needs, and with our funds, namely Cohesion Fund and ERDF, we are supporting these different areas of investment. So the Just Transition mechanism comes in the framework of the European Green Deal investment plan. And the objective is to mobilize investment to achieve the European Green Deal objectives. So we have created a mechanism which is new in our policy, which is that on top of the existing support, we give extra support to those who are mostly hit by the transition. And the cornerstone of the implementation of this Just Transition Fund, which is part of the Just Transition mechanism, and the cornerstone of this mechanism is our territorial Just Transition plans. So this is a new approach that we are having in our policy. And I would like to underline 3 aspects which I think are key for the transformation. And the first aspect is to establish a vision, so a common vision for the territory. And a vision with transition pathways, so with clear milestones, 2030 and 2050, how do we get there? And the second aspect is a clear assessment of the negative impacts of the transition, negative socio-economic impacts, and how will this territory tackle these impacts. And the third very important element, and we are insisting on it, is a strong partnership. Because if all the stakeholders are not pulling in the same direction, the transition and the transformation doesn't happen. We are requesting a broad stakeholder engagement. So if you have a mining region, depending on the problems they are undergoing, we will need to have trade unions on board, we will need to have NGOs, we will need to have coal miners, but also the employers in these sectors. And what is key also for us in the transformation is the involvement of the youth. We see that the youth in certain regions have had a very important role, have played an important role. We have published also a study on the role of youth in just transition. So these are the three key elements which I would outline. Of course, there are additional ones. We want to support, as I said before, this transformation further. This is why we published a toolkit which recommends also certain forms of governance for this transformation. And we hope to launch, and we plan to launch in 2023, a specific platform to support cohesion policy in this transformation, and which will be called a Cohesion for Transition platform. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Persson, what implications do these reflections and these issues have for justice and inclusion? Do you believe it is possible, or how do you believe it is possible to achieve a sustainability transformation that is both urgent and fast and effective, but also just and democratic and inclusive, and also, as Ms. Boveda pointed out, also taking into account the future generations' rights and their participation?
Also a very big question, a lot of adjectives, just, inclusive, etc. But of course, this is what we are striving for, and what we have. Countries have expressed they want through Agenda 2030, a commitment to these principles. So I'll share a few thoughts, but also first, when for this global sustainable development report, when we do take stock, we of course see that the 17 goals have stagnated. Basically, this is quite a negative picture, that no progress has really happened since 2019, of course much due to the pandemic and now the conflict in Ukraine and all the cascading impacts. But what we want to try and do with this report, because I think the previous one really did a good job in terms of specifying what needs to be done. We had 6 big transformations were identified. Decarbonization, for example, or food system transformation. We want to drill into a bit more the how, and I think what we are currently looking at is 2 sort of key messages we want to really make clearly. One is transformation is possible. There are historical examples of major societal change that we can really learn from. And also transformation is inevitable. So we see that these changes, shocks, crises are sort of happening, and investing in sustainable development is really the best insurance policy. So these are a little bit conflicting key messages. The first transformation is possible, sort of suggests we do have a lot of agency, we can shape these transformations, we can plan them. But transformation is also inevitable. It's, we are we need to build our resilience. But I think this really reflects the reality of change, that you can both plan it, but you also need to kind of respond to things outside of your control. So we try to look at all these examples and evidence, really provide those inspiring examples, learning. We have had these really big, pretty fast missions historically, the way that social housing was expanded in the post-war period in many countries in the world. Sweden built 1 million homes during a relatively short period. Of course, the US New Deal, which was a massive program, but yeah, of course the EU Green Deal is partly inspired from that. The Green Revolution, it was transformative, also with a lot of negative impacts, but we can still learn from it. And of course, we have ample examples also when change happens to us, not least the pandemic, as was mentioned. But what we also find, of course, is that fairness is key for the planned transformations, and in the scientific literature on this, we distinguish between fairness in the sense of distributive justice, compensating those who lose, procedural justice, by which decision-making process do you come to these plans, and recognition justice, who are invited to the table. And all these three elements are quite important. Maybe we tend to focus more on the distributive aspects first, who is going to lose and win in more economic terms, whether employment or so. But interestingly also, what has been found in science is that if you have a good process, a good procedure, that can to some extent compensate for the sort of negative distributional impacts. So if people feel they are part of a process and really internalize a decision, own it, they are more likely to accept sacrifices or change. Of course, as you kind of implied in your question there, the challenge is time. Do we have time for these procedures that are so important in terms of how we plan the process, ensure it's locally grounded, invites multiple stakeholders, or do we need to see change more quickly, given the short time to 2030, and then given the tipping points that we heard about in the morning? And I think that's the real dilemma here. And again, what we seem to see is that humans are pretty good at adapting quickly when change is immediate, like with the pandemic. Most societies still accepted the restrictions. And also if change is kind of slow enough, gradual enough, maybe we also don't really perceive it as change imposed on us. It becomes naturalized. So I think this kind of time window, which we are now dealing with, where it's like maybe 6 months up to 5 years, that's the tricky one, and where you easily get groups and communities into these kind of bargaining positions. It's perceived more as a maybe negotiation than this jointly owned process. So I'll finish off by saying also that the theme of this conversation is working together, which I think is, of course, incredibly important, and I think we are trying that in many ways, also from science. But I think we also need to be realistic and realize that we see goal conflicts and we see conflicts between interests. So I think rather recognize that, be explicit, and develop and use good conflict resolution processes rather than sort of, pretend it's all synergies and all good. So I think quite an honest conversation with the public is important at this point.
Thank you, and I think it's really, really good that you sort of name the time frame. It's not a short-term change like the start of the pandemic. It's also not a slow, gentle cultural sea change. It's the mid-term that's difficult, and we're in a decade of multiple overlapping crises, and that already caused a lot of negotiation and interest conflicts. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Kärkkäinen, from the perspective of governmental practices and public finance, how do you see that this sort of a planned transformation in troubled times? What are the tools for supporting that in the middle of all of the other pressures that are placed on public finance at this time?
I think the main point is that the transition is planned, because we know the urgency of the decision making, but but the urgency can also lead to unoptimal policies, and that we have seen in the few crises that we have had. So we should avoid making large decisions while in a crisis if possible, because that can lead to unoptimal and blunt tools. We have seen this both in the pandemic and the energy crisis, where we have had to build new social security and taxation measures in a matter of weeks and not months or years that we would like to have. And when you have just weeks to build a new policy, you're bound to lead to blunt tools and unoptimal tools from the perspective of public finance, but also from the perspective of households as well. And one thing that I have been wondering about, looking at the energy crisis and how different governments have reacted to kind of surging electricity prices, is how hard is it to compensate fully to households and also have the change that we need? Because from the economic point of view and the ecologic point of view, we should just say electricity prices are surging, you should cut down consumption. But from the fairness point of view or the political point of view, that's not an option. But if we compensate it fully to all households, then we won't get the change that we need. And that's something that I think we're going to have to balance, is how much we can compensate from the household point of view, from the political point of view, but also how our public finances can achieve kind of the sustainability that we can afford to have these kind of compensation measures to households that are in dire need. So one thing that I kind of find is the main thing is we should now know what the next crisis is, so we can have measures that will fit to that. And of course we don't know what the next crisis is unless we know the root measures and the root causes, but we should kind of think of what kind of policies at the national level, at the municipality level, at the EU level, we should be now thinking about and building about, that we will be better equipped when the next crisis hits us.
So this is, I guess, we've also mentioned the word resilience here earlier, that we will not know what the next crisis is, but the system should somehow be equipped to deal with any possible kind of a crisis that is going to come next. Did anyone else in the panel have anything to add to these points about negotiating sort of the political processes and needs and the ecological points of view, or shall we move on to the global economy? Because then my next question is to Professor Linnanen, because all of these issues are related to the structures of the global economic system. How is the economy equipped to deal with the systemic transformation?
Well, not so well. I think what has happened is that our economic system, in a way, it's been locked into growth dependence. I'm not taking stance whether growth is bad or good, but we have such structures which have locked our system that we have to grow. And in a way, taking this managerial perspective, it's this kind of phrase, you manage what you measure, and if we measure GDP, and that has happened since the Second World War, the great acceleration of everything, acceleration of production, acceleration of consumption, information flows, material flows, monetary flows. So we got it because we measured amount of transactions, which is GDP, and it's exponential growth after growth. So we have had exponential curves also on the impact side, and somehow we've created this kind of machine, which it's a bit difficult to stop. But okay, then if we take a honest look of those elephants in the economic system, I don't know whether these are root causes, but I give you three, and they are negotiable. I'm not quite sure about them, but that's what current science is indicating. So the first one is overconsumption. And we have to realize that ordinary life in Europe is overconsumption. If you look from the ecological footprint point of view. So it's not just the luxury of the elite and all that kind of consumption. It's our ordinary structure is overconsumption. How to deal with that? I have no answer for that, but we have to start addressing it, that consumption is, we are allowed, there is a design principle that we are allowed to consume the amount we earn. And why should it be like that? So if we ask an honest question on that. Then the second clear problem is that the rules of distribution, which also mentioned there in the economic system, they tend to increase inequality in a current way. So it appears to be so that provision of capital is, given a higher value than provision of labor, or even more so provision of care, which is not seen in GDP calculations. So, and this is a mechanism which makes rich people richer and poor people poorer. So how to deal with this issue? It's how we distribute the wealth which we already have achieved. We don't have to grow, we have an amount of wealth already. And the third one is transparency, or actually the lack of transparency in the economic system. So we still accept the fact that, if there are large flows of money, we can hide them. We can hide ownership, and this is an accepted practice of today. Of course, we know that money laundering and those kind of issues have been taken, there have been more serious concerns and mechanisms for that, but still, if I would have a large sum of money, I could hide it. And I could use that for purposes which no one can trace back. So why we have designed and still accept such, and when it comes to just transition, this kind of transparency is crucial, and it's also relevant when we talk about money.
So we have these systemic barriers to transformation in the global economic system level. Johanna Kentala-Lehtonen, how does that sound to you, given the current political and economic situation and the pressure to use the tools you have in the Prime Minister's office? Are those real concerns to you, and if so, how can those be overcome in the mid-term time frame? No, sorry, that was an unfair question, but generally, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, firstly, I think these are very interesting to put these root causes in such a list and then think about what they actually mean. And I agree with the first one. That's also what I was kind of trying to put out, that we need the new definition of the good life is that we need to see that we don't need to consume this much, and it's not possible anymore. We're not living in an abundant world where everybody can have everything. But this is, of course, very difficult message politically. But at the same time, I also think that the values have been changing. And that there are a lot of people already thinking that consumption is not the goal of life, and I think this is just such a message that keeps on growing, and I think it will influence. The second one, the rules of distribution, is of course something that we have been battling for hundreds of years. It's a historical problem, and there is no easy solution. In like thinking of political realities, thinking of the situation of today, these it's good to understand these root causes. It's good to bring them to light, but at the same time understand that it is difficult to react fast and to get enough political backing for the politicians to be able to make decisions that will change this fast. I would also like to come back to the idea of resilience and building the resilience to the new crisis. I think that what Olle said about the need to know the next crisis, to need to be prepared to plan the transformation is crucial, and is something that we really should be putting resources on. I think that one thing that can be done on the governmental level and is something to think about, for example, when the new government starts next spring, is how to divide the resources inside the ministries, for example, and how to find those places where we really need to put our attention on so that we are resilient when the new crises come and prepared for them.
Now, one of the questions that we also wanted to address in this panel was who should lead the process, which clearly maybe does not will not be one actor. But Miriam Boveda, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. Who could lead these kinds of change processes so that they are fair and just, and they're perceived as fair and just?
Well, I think for that we need to come back to the basic principle that we have in cohesion policy, which is the partnership principle. So we have this key feature, and we have had this for decades. Of course, we are operating in the administrative and institutional framework of member states and regions. So we need to see how to best have this principle implemented, and what is the best governance structure possible to make this process most effective. And I was also thinking, what is partnership is not given to all the stakeholders. There is a learning process for being an effective partner. And what we make available in the framework of our funds also is support to stakeholders to also become effective partners, because, as we said before, time is an issue. And you need to learn how to negotiate what is the best for the collective best, no, for the collectivity. So this is why this support in capacity building for stakeholders is important. And of course, they have to do the best possible to make their voice heard, but in a good manner. And we, at the level of the European Commission, we also, of course, implement a partnership principle with continuous dialogue with all stakeholders. And we are having a dialogue on just transition every 6 months. So I want to invite all of you to join presentially or online the next dialogue on just transition that we will have in the framework of the Just Transition platform on the 24th and 26th of October. And there we have the possibility to interact with all the stakeholders who are part of the Just Transition at the EU level. Last time round we had more than 1,000 participants. So this is a key moment where we can have this constructive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, since we have many scientists in the room, I wanted to ask, sort of where do you see, and this is kind of to all of you, but maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Persson. What are your thoughts? Where do you see a possibility for scientists to act in order to get data-based or knowledge-based decision-making into a good start and involved in those processes of dialogue and partnership? What can scientists do, and where should they start?
I think a lot is already being done by committed scientists, engaged scholars, science activists. It's also a term that we hear more and more. If I could wish, I would, wish us as a community, science, to maybe put aside for these next 5 years or so a little bit on the, academic, like the emphasis on publications and sort of meeting those academic criteria and using the tools and skills, resources that we have to really serve the transformation. However, not to the point that, undermining our credibility, of course, as scientists. I think that this is a really important issue to not cross that line and still stick to, of course, the scientific method and validating that, but still being as applied as possible, I think. And I think there are 3 ways we can, 3 powerful tools. One is to convene dialogues. Sometimes it's more kind of less conflict-inducing to invite to a research workshop than a sort of meeting with policymakers. You can have a logic of joint learning rather than sort of, okay, are we starting to negotiate positions here? I think another way is, of course, to provide evidence, really quantitative evidence, which policy tools might work, what is the cost of inaction, etc. What are the benefits of action? This is really a tried and tested method, and what we find at our institute is that this is the type of information that decision makers really need. For example, we put out some numbers on global methane emission reductions that really helped countries to agree on this global methane pledge a year ago, when otherwise the climate negotiations were quite stuck. The third way is sort of the same point, but really evaluating policy instruments that are in use, and even more that's being done today. I was quite shocked when I learned that carbon pricing mechanisms have not really been so widely evaluated. One recent study did a synthesis, and there were quite few actually evaluations of actually implemented carbon pricing measures, and the finding was that they have not been as effective as perhaps assumed. So I think that's a really sort of hands-on important role for science to contribute to the evaluation and learning at this point in the transformation.
Those are really good 3 points. And Mr. Kärkkäinen, since you are then on the side of creating policy and wanting to you're a recipient of the science and shaping policy based on data. What do you see? Where do you want to see scientists coming in more strongly?
I hope that we're not the recipients. It's more dialogue, because that's what I think we need more. So active dialogue between policymakers and researchers in order to know what works and what not. But also I think that we need more doing and less talking. Because if we say that we need a completely new economic system in order to face these problems, my worry is that we will be stuck in discussing what kind of system we should have instead of using the policies that we currently have. So for example, if our problem is overconsumption, we have consumption taxation. So we can increase the price of consumption, which will lower the consumption. But if this is something that we would want, we should have political parties that actively say that we will want to increase the price of consumption, and no, we won't compensate it for you. But instead, at least in Finland, we are discussing on how we can compensate the current inflation to different households. And we are going to have our parliamentary elections next April, and I would be surprised if I see some political party suggesting that we should increase the price of consumption. Instead, I can see that we only be discussing on how to compensate current inflation, and that won't help if we want to decrease consumption.
And clearly, it's quite likely that we're heading into a long period where it's never going to be the perfect moment to increase taxation, to get industries to contribute more. It's going to be a difficult moment. Quickly, we're moving towards the end of this panel, but Professor Linnanen, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, I would like to take strategy perspective. Actually, what those strategies or house strategies basically answering question from point A to reach point B, so question how. So those three ways of acting are in a way symbiotic strategies. So you work together, science works together with policymakers in a symbiotic way, trying to influence the decision making. And this is clearly the dominant talk also here in this panel. But as we know that this is a large system level transformation, typically you cannot transform a system by incremental measures. You need, more powerful actions to make this kind of large-scale transformation to happen. Typically, there is little evidence that any this kind of large societal change starts from those in power. It's quite natural. So it inclines that the strategies are more radical, what we need in order to achieve this transformation. And I think it was also mentioned that scientists as activists are growing, and there is a clear explanation for that. It's a seek for more radical solutions and ways of acting. And we are seeing it also with youth movements, and if I take the most, so in a way, criticism of present system, seeking for alternatives, and even taking one step further, again, using these strategy lenses, I would say that even civil disobedience, we will see it more. It's clear, as long as the system is trying to work in a symbiotic and incremental way, we are not going to solve this, so we are going to see more, critical voices and more critical action during this critical decade.
And now, and thank you, and that was this was a thought that I didn't want to leave hanging without being voiced here, that the question of incremental measures versus more radical challenges to the status quo, it is naturally a big open question here. And then I will end with your thoughts on concrete points of action. What kinds of collaborative actions between different, it can be science policy, it can be science activist, it can be anything you think of, but what kinds of collaborative actions you would like to see happening in these next, say, 3 to 5 years? And maybe now we can just run through the panel. We'll start with you, Ms. Kertala-Lehtonen, and then move on from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has already brought up in this panel. So more dialogue, and especially what came from Ms. Boveda was that we need to take all the different actors to the discussion, especially the youth.
Yeah, and please, and just a quick note. Let's keep this was perfect length. Let's keep these short so that everyone can get their coffee.
It's a hard question, but I pick up on what you said. We need to do more doing, less talking. So I really, very practical way, more secondments of scientists to ministries or municipalities to actually be in the room in the discussion, because we don't really have time to wait.
I would suggest having, after the next parliamentary elections, having a large discussion between the parliament and research, and setting the goal at the parliamentary level, because our governmental term is 4 years and that's short time. So we need a kind of parliamentary set goal, and the research need to help in setting that.
I think scientists have been alerting us for 50 years. This was recently the anniversary of the article published in the Nature on climate change. So I think we need to speak to people's brain, but also to people's heart. And I was attending an exhibition on the emergency of climate change, an art exhibition. So maybe it's a way of transforming the society through different fora and enlarging the circles. So I think we need to enlarge the circles to speak to people's heart and brain.
Yes, it's about acting and doing. We should start creating alternative ways of organizing today, not thinking what's going to be in future. We have to do it today. In a way, we might call it heterotopia, which is not somewhere distant future what we hope for, but we just start doing something which illustrates good life for all within planetary boundaries.
Thank you. Now I want to warmly thank all the panelists for your contributions. And clearly these are complex and critical questions, and we all know that the current political and economic landscape is not the easiest, but it also might present us with opportunities, as was said in the beginning. People do react when there is a crisis. And that means that some kind of a transformation is also not only possible, but also inevitable. We'll continue with these discussions during the next 2 days. Now it's time for a coffee break, and that's until 11 our time. So all of you are participating here in Paasitorni, please grab a cup of coffee or tea, have a nice chat. And after the coffee break, we'll continue with the parallel sessions. 3 interesting discussions taking place simultaneously. So at 11, please find the parallel session that you have registered for when you register for the event. And then for the audience online, we'll also have a break right now. You'll have time for a cup of coffee. The live stream will continue at 11 Finnish time, so in half an hour. And the live stream will continue with one of the sessions. That's the sustainability of the use of natural resources, role of biodiversity offsetting. That's the parallel session that all of you online will be joining. Thank you so much. Have a great coffee break. And thank you again, panelists.